Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Harper, and today I am super excited to be joined by Dr. Annie Campanile.
It all comes down to the nervous system. And of course, yes, communication and words, but in order for us to repair relationships after we've had destructive conflict, for example, or in order for us to feel comfortable sighing like I just did, we have to first know that it's worthwhile to pause and allow ourselves to connect to our bodies. It's not all about the intellect and being quick on our feet and being quick to speak.
Annie, as I like to call her, has been there since the beginning. She was there when Ripple was in its infancy, when I didn't know where I was going to go, what I was going to do, or where I was going to take it. And I am so blessed that she agreed to sit down and share all the wisdom of her work. She works in the healthcare space as an executive coach. And when you hear her, you're going to understand why she is such an influential person in this world, because she has heart, compassion, how to overcome the drama and the trauma that's holding a lot of leaders and a lot of teams back. I was so enamored with this conversation. We went so many different ways throughout this interview. It was just such an absolute pleasure. I felt like I didn't even get to a fraction of what I wanted to talk to her about because the conversation was that intense and that interesting. You're going to learn so much. You're going to be able to identify and understand some of the stress situations and how you respond to them. And you're going to be able to put some of this to work for you right now. And I think you're going to want to find out all that you can about Dr. Annie and her work because she is that great. I will tell you that she has a podcast that I just love. I think this is something you need to go subscribe to. It's on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, all the major platforms, called Drama-Free Teams. And who doesn't need to have drama-free teams in today's leadership? She is one of the probably the most transformational leadership coaches that you're ever going to have an opportunity to learn from. She works currently with senior leaders in the healthcare space, and she is doing some amazing work. And you're going to get to learn a little bit about that today. So with no further ado, let's dive into today's episode with one of our throwback Ripplers, Dr. Annie Campanile. Guys, I am super excited to have Dr. Annie join me today for the Ripple Effect Podcast. Annie, it has been a very long time, but you haven't changed one bit. I'm very jealous. So it's so good to see you. How are you doing?
It's great to see you too. I am doing great. And it's funny to hear I haven't changed one bit because boy, has there been a lot of change, but always working on healing and growing myself. So it's good to see that that's has external evidence.
Yes, well, definitely. I mean, you don't look like you've aged today, and I need your beauty secrets because I have not had the same luck.
I don't know about that.
Well, so I have been super excited about this interview because you and I came out with our books about the same time, and we were sort of diving into that first time author, waters way back in 2004, 2005 timeframe. And one of the things that I really respected and admired about you about the work that I did was the fact that you kind of saw that cross collaboration in terms of where I wanted to take my work with the Ripple and how it would affect teams and interactions and engagement, and what you were doing with your work at the time and what fascinated you about human dynamics within a team environment. But catch my audience up, just give them a little bit of your origin story, a sort of, kind of how you became the superhero that you are today.
Sure. When you and I met in 2004-ish, I was in my process of researching hope in the workplace for my PhD. And I had partnered on that first book called Openness Works
Yep.
with my late chair, so Oscar Mink. He may have just recently passed when you and I met. So I was
Yeah,
in the
I
midst
think
of a
so.
bunch of
Yep.
turmoil. Yes. But wanting to honor his perspective of how to create openness in the workplace, how to open up communication. And I was definitely aware that I was uncomfortable coming out from behind Oscar's coattails.
Oh,
But since
wow.
he had inconveniently to me left this physical plane, I didn't have a choice. So after researching hope in the workplace with nurses and teachers, I felt drawn to go into healthcare and work in organizational development, continue my career in organizational development, grow as an executive coach. I've done that in 5 health systems now across the country, as well as my own private practice. And I keep at times, I have tried to step away from healthcare because it is such a challenging environment, but I always get pulled back because the people who work there just care so deeply and
Sure.
yet suffer a lot because of that interpersonal drama that just comes when everybody's in survival mode all the time.
Yeah.
And because that's my particular point of interest is how do I support myself and others in having productive conflict, in calming our nervous systems when we're overwhelmed, what better place to do it than healthcare?
Yeah. Productive conflict. Can you share for our audience just a little bit about what that is? Because I think a lot of people hear conflict and automatically think it's bad, but in a lot of environments, it's very healthy and important to have.
Yeah, I agree. I think the word conflict, even I feel my body kind of tighten and cringe
Yeah.
when I hear the word conflict. So I don't want to pretend that conflict will never be comfortable
Yeah.
or the same as sitting by Barton Springs pool eating an ice cream cone. Like it's not going to be. But conflict can be destructive. It can harm our relationships when we're coming at it from a fight or flight standpoint. I'm right, you're wrong. That's what would be destructive conflict. Productive conflict is I have a different point of view than you, but I want to understand where you're coming from. So our ideas might conflict with one another. We might be having different opinions that on the surface might seem incompatible, but we as people can still be compatible. We can still connect. We can still come to each other with an open heart, and that way that conflict can produce a better result. It can also produce a stronger relationship and collaboration, and so that's how I would conceive of productive conflict.
I love that. I love that explanation. When I think about the workplace in general, I think about it's kind of like when we were, brought into the classroom or onto the playground as kindergartners. We're thrown into this sandbox with other kids. We don't know them, they don't know us, and we sort of have to figure it out. And as kids, we sort of naturally do that, right? And then it's weird because as we begin to experience that as adults and we get into the bigger sandbox, the career sandbox, organizations throw us into these sandboxes expecting us to automatically get along and conform and know how to interact and get along with one another. And we have not been raised that way. We've not been cultured that way. We've come up through kind of a competitive environment throughout, competitive sports and school, and who's on top and who's made the top grade and who gets the job. And then you get thrown into this sandbox arena where all of a sudden now you're the new person and you've got to sort of prove yourself. And we're expected to just know how to figure that out. And it becomes even more difficult, I think, in today's world because so many people are dependent on devices and technology to communicate and engage. What's your perception of how to help an organization or a leadership team identify and understand that it isn't as just simple as throwing people together and you're going to have the formula for success? You actually have to invest in your people to help them understand the dynamics of relationship building, communication, and obviously how to resolve issues when they come up in the form of conflict.
Mm. Before I answer your question, I want to make a comment about what we learn as kids because I
Okay.
think that's really important. We're on the playground. There's a conflict. As you say, we work it out, which is true.
Yep.
How we work it out, I think sometimes is that we develop what I call protective patterns.
Okay.
So, protective behaviors that help us not be rejected or not be criticized or not be left out of the game,
Yeah.
that then carries forward. So, for example, I moved a lot as a kid and I was in a very uh, difficult household with some very difficult family members. I was the pleaser. I watched, I stayed silent, I spoke when I thought I could help someone else feel better. I did the same thing on the playground.
Yeah.
So then as I grew and as I grew into a leader, I grew into a leader who was self-sacrificing, who worked all hours and didn't complain, not at least to anyone else, but to myself, maybe I did.
Sure.
So I was
Sure.
fostering internal conflict, internal drama, and really hoping I could help my team have high morale, but yet I didn't necessarily have high morale. So when leaders who are exasperated and overwhelmed and just want their people to get along say to them, just go talk to each other, work it out,
Mhm. Yeah.
but they themselves don't yet know how to do that, it's everybody's put into a bind.
Yeah.
So what I like to do is start with the leaders and give them that support. I was talking with someone last week and just sort of sharing how the very first thing I talk about is how do you know when your nervous system is going into a survival state, fight, flight, freeze, so that you can hopefully start to ground your body and connect to that. So your body will take care of itself. The nervous system will regulate itself given the opportunity.
Yeah.
Then we can figure out how we want to communicate. So for me, what I call the four fundamentals of drama-free communication are really important because they have to go in order. Notice your survival response, calm it down in the moment, manage your protective patterns. So for me, I have to suspend my urge to please so that I then can communicate clearly. And maybe that means I have to have the courage to be honest in a moment when previously I would have said nothing. Once leaders understand that and I think get that sense of hope that they individually can start to do this more, it's very natural for them to say, oh, I want my team to understand this too. If a leader comes to me and says, I want you to train my team in drama-free communication, I'll say, great, tell me about your team. Tell me about how you are influencing the communication now. And, sometimes they love it when I say, we're going to start with you. And, if they don't, that's okay. There are lots
Yeah.
of other people who are very happy to take your money and do the training.
But that's not you. Yeah.
Maybe they think it'll be effective, but I'm going to say, you know what? I don't think it will be, and I'm not going to take your money if you're not willing and able to lead the way
Yeah.
and get the
That,
relief.
yeah. Do you find that there's certain circumstances where leadership is trying to almost excuse themselves away from the process and they don't want to take any ownership, which makes it easy to say, well, I didn't contact you because I needed the work. I needed my team to get the work. How do you break through that barrier if that's the case, if they're trying to create that, that boundary so that they don't have to be a part of the healing process?
I will say I don't confront that very often. And I think it's
Good.
because on my website and in my podcast, my point of view is very clear.
Yeah.
And I try to be really clear about I might be a fit for you if this is true of you. I might not be if this is true. At the same time, if a leader were to come to me and to kind of insist, I don't have time for that. I don't want to do coaching. I don't want to look at myself. I need my team to get in line. Well, to be perfectly honest, I would refer them to someone else. But let's just say the universe said, Annie, you must help this leader.
Yeah. Yeah.
What will you do? Probably I would ask that leader some questions to understand their degree of satisfaction in their leadership role, get a little better sense of their current beliefs around communication and around, so, some leaders I think have this belief that it's not appropriate for them. They shouldn't have to help
Sure.
other professionals who report to them communicate effectively. I think that's actually just coming from a desire to just get away from it.
Yeah. Yeah. Avoidance. Yeah, for sure.
Hmm. But I would all probably land on this question of how's that going for you?
And yet they ended up on your website, right? So
Yeah, exactly. There's some reason. Something's not working well to the way you want it to be. So, yeah, I honestly just take that approach of asking a lot of exploratory questions, not with an agenda to try to convince anyone of anything. I don't
yeah,
want to try to convince somebody that I'm their person. If I'm not, I'm not. But
yeah,
I think that in some industries, especially industries that are highly intellectual, in order to advance into senior leadership, you have to be competent in sharing ideas from a data driven perspective. And human behavior is, as we both know, it is not linear and it is not easy to put into a chart.
yeah,
And so, in that, like, I don't know, I worked for a high tech startup back in 2000, and that was an environment where it was crazy. I don't know, whether maybe 40 people in one big room together with very low partitions between the desks.
yeah,
Everyone could see everyone else's face. To connect with one another, they would play a video game everybody's still at their own workstation on their headsets on the computer, and they're sitting next to each other. That blew my mind. So
Yeah.
in that setting, I don't think I would have been their go-to trainer. I mean,
Yeah.
that was a good job at the time, but maybe they worked it out by killing each other on the video game
Yeah.
as aliens. I don't know.
I was gonna say back then it might have been Doom and they were just off killing each
Oh, I
other and
think it
not
was.
taking out the aggressive behaviors online,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
Well, the interesting, the reason I asked that question, right, is that I think a lot of times leaders, there's this assumption when you become a leader that you sort of have to have it all figured out. And you and I both know that that's not true. And I think really good leaders out there obviously understand that. But I think that there is this pressure we get or we place on ourselves when we get put into a role of responsibility that we are sort of above the fray because, we've been, promoted to that level, and that especially when the people that we're directly responsible for aren't getting along, or there's communication issues, or there's drop balls, somehow that negatively looks or impacts us, how we are viewed by the CEO or the executive team or our colleagues. And I think one of the things that you run into is with a lot of leaders, they don't know that it's okay to ask for help. It's actually okay to recognize that you don't know everything and to have someone like a coach that can be there to provide the opportunity to have more in-depth conversations to help you lead you to the answers, right? A coach doesn't actually give you the answers, but they lead you to have these aha moments and understanding. And they're also one of the best partners because there's no judgment. They're there because they want to see you be successful and see you propel your awesomeness forward so that the team actually wants to work with you and wants to be there for you. But I see a lot of times leaders that have that resistance in kind of like that scenario where it's like, well, I just don't have the time for this. This is just, I need this team fixed. I need the problem solved. And if you don't fix it from the top down, it becomes a bigger issue.
And sometimes those leaders, they want me to coach someone who might be a high level leader, or for example, a physician who isn't effective in their communication, and their communication approach is causing problems. The leader wants me to coach them to correct that, but the leader wants to be separate. And also, the leader doesn't want to make it high risk because, by the way, we can't lose this person. That is a
Yeah.
no-win situation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in that case, I just tell them, unless you're willing to set very clear boundaries and expectations, and this person actually has something to lose by not changing, it will not change. So there are times, I would say, when maybe the leader doesn't have to be completely invested and, open up their own self-reflection deeply, but they do need to set clear boundaries, and they actually need to participate in the process and have conversations with the person whose communication might be putting patient safety at risk, for example, or putting productivity at risk.
I would imagine in healthcare specifically, as you were talking, I was thinking about the egos and the challenge of that dynamic because it is, there's certain positions that are very specialized. They're roles that are very coveted. And, if you end up with a physician who is an exceptionally great doctor, as an example, and that healthcare system really depends on them because they are the specialist. Everybody wants to come to that health system because they have that talent there. Then, and nobody has ever ego checked that particular physician. That has to be an interesting dynamic because you might have I loved what you said, they have to understand that there's something to lose. And how do you deal with that situation when you might have a physician that would be in demand for maybe a competitive healthcare system? So how do you leverage that to show, you know, there's an understanding there that, or help them see that there's an understanding that maybe what they're doing is not acceptable and it's only going to cost them whether they're here or there, right? You're eventually going to hit a brick wall because you're not willing to change or you're not willing to adjust the approach or your attitude or your communication style.
Yeah, I've worked with several clients over the years who had this situation, and particularly in academic health systems where they depend on grants and they do really important research. There have been times where a specialty surgical department was struggling to retain nurses. They were struggling to retain secretaries. People didn't even want to float from another department to cover a gap because one particular or perhaps two surgeons were
Mm.
so mean and difficult to work with. And a couple of times, that person, that incumbent, let's say, had been there for decades, and they knew, I know I'm the one that brings in the money.
Yep.
You're not going
I'm
to fire me.
entrenched. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm entrenched. But so the tipping point for every time I've seen this actually make a shift, the tipping point is the staff won't stay. Other physicians start to complain. Often the chair, the physician who's the leader of all of those physicians, might feel nervous because they need that person to collaborate when they're actually doing surgery. So there's that mixed line of, I'm not just your leader, I'm also your clinical colleague. And wow. So once the chief medical officer, like the very highest level leader, finally becomes willing to risk losing that, what they might say is disruptive, that's a pretty loaded term in healthcare, but that's disruptive physician, then I've seen the culture shift. And it does take time, but actually once it's clear to everyone that the new behavioral expectations apply to everyone, I've seen psychological safety be built pretty fast.
Yeah.
And at times, yes, that physician did choose to leave, but there have been also times when they chose to get some coaching and figure out what is driving this behavior for me and how do I do it differently. That's I will say that's not the most common, but it has happened, and it's so exciting when that happens because that person, that surgeon, goes from being angry all the time and on edge all the time to actually feeling some peace.
Yeah.
And everybody else feels peace when they're with them. So they get to benefit too. It's not just let's change your behavior so other people like you better or like working with you better.
Yeah, I've got to think even for that surgeon, that sort of has that aha moment and realizes that, oh my gosh, it doesn't have to be this hard. It doesn't have to be this difficult. And I'm the maker of all the drama that,
Yeah.
wow, it doesn't have to be this way. And there is the possibility for the second half of my career that I could actually completely change how people view me and the level of, I would say, the way that people would conduct themselves around you, the more openness they would have, the more just the comfortableness of working together. Because like you were saying, if the alternative is that it could become a high stakes situation, and if nobody can talk to you and you can't communicate, and there's anxiety even in the high stakes world of an operating room, somebody's life is on the line if that doesn't get fixed.
It's true. And on the other end of the spectrum, so that example would be somebody whose primary survival response is fight. We all have a primary with our
Hmm.
immediate go-to. On the other end of the spectrum would be flee. And I've coached very highly educated leaders, including physician leaders, who are, as you say, they are well respected in their field. They do a great job clinically, but they're so afraid of conflict that even though they have the leadership title and they're expected to hold physicians accountable, they avoid the conversations or they are very vague and they drop hints and they expect the other person to like understand, oh, I need to change my behavior because they're just so anxious about conflict. With them, it's helping them to be more assertive and more clear. In fact, recently I was coaching a leader who was really frustrated with a leader who reports to them and was saying, I said, well, have you told this person exactly what you want them to do? Well, I think so. I suggested it might be better if they did such and such. I said, if you said that to me, I would not know that that's what you expected me to do.
Yeah. Might be a minor suggestion, right?
Yeah, it's a nice suggestion. I can reject it. And
Yeah.
therefore, I'm going to go do my own thing. So, it's like we have a lot of internal drama, all of us, of should I say this? Should I not?
Yeah.
Why did that person do that? I don't know. What's going to happen? There's just so much happening internally. That's again why the first fundamental of drama-free communication is internal.
Yeah, you've
That's
got to look inside. You got to
yeah.
understand that particular way that we're set up to respond to certain circumstances, certain behavior types. You mentioned, growing up in a challenging home environment. I did as well, and I was like a nervous, long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs, right? All the
Yeah.
time waiting for things to just, collapse or explode. And I recognized early on that I sort of, especially as a business leader, a lot of what I had seen and been a part of growing up was really shaping how I was as a early entrepreneur and as a leader, expecting my people to to do certain things, not have to be asked twice, all those same
Yeah.
things we heard as kids, right? But all
Mhm.
those things came up in a way that was very, very unfortunate because it wasn't who I was and who I really wanted to be, but didn't really have the tools or the wherewithal or understanding on how to get out of my own way in those circumstances. And I can only imagine if you've been beholden, or I should say emboldened, over the course of a long career, especially a doctor with, like you said, with a reputation and a pedigree that's been allowed to be entitled in a lot of capacities to kind of get away from that. That's got to be really hard to shift that behavior.
When people's lives are literally in your hands and you are the leader in that OR, everything relies on your word and your ability to make a quick decision. Then you walk out of the operating room and someone tells you, you really need to soften the way that you communicate. That has to be such a contradiction internally. Like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
So I try to bring so much compassion into those conversations. And I think it's so important to help people have compassion for themselves. Because just like you, I love that image of a cat, a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Wow, that is a powerful image. Let's have compassion for that experience and also celebrate your wisdom of figuring out how to survive and how to navigate that environment. That totally served you when you were growing up.
Yeah.
And now if you found yourself in a leadership role, it no longer that protective pattern no longer served you in those situations. Yes, if a crisis happened, it would serve you. But day to day, people just, we all kind of get accustomed because life is so stressful and there are
Sure.
always reasons. Go online, you'll have a million reasons to be nervous and scared.
Yeah.
So the protections, like it kicks in. But can we say thank you, survival response, for being ready? And also, I don't need you right now. I'm going to connect with this other person. That takes a lot of skill and willingness to be a learner.
Yeah. You mentioned something on your website that I really, want to tie to, because I think basically what you just said right there is being able to recognize it in the moment. The somatic response that your body has to those situations, whether it be being challenged, being told you're wrong, the negative things that tend to come up, or someone calling you on, your attitude or your ego. These things put us into that fight or flight kind of mindset. What's happening in the body when before you even open your ears or say a word when that is occurring? Maybe share a little bit about your thought process there, and so my audience can understand that, because much of
Oh,
what
sure.
happens in a microsecond in our bodies when
It
you feel
does.
like these situations are occurring.
Yes. I love this topic, as you know.
Okay, cool.
The reason I love it so much is that I was so disconnected from my body for my first 33 years of life. And
Really?
as I went through counseling and healing and learning, people started helping me connect and understand what happens in the nervous system. It absolutely changed the trajectory of my whole life and helped me heal from profound trauma from that I've been carrying and
Yeah.
trying so hard for years to heal. We have something called an autonomic nervous system. There are two primary elements of that I like to focus on: sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Okay, so I remember what these do by the sympathetic nervous system starts with an S. It's what speeds up. It speeds us up when we need to be quick to respond. If you're going to be, are you in Texas right now?
Yeah. Yeah. In
Okay,
Austin.
so what's an animal that might chase you in Texas? Like
Let's say,
a boar, wild boar?
how about a coyote?
Okay, okay. So you're being chased by a coyote. Your sympathetic nervous system will jump into action. Your focus gets totally pinpointed on how do I get away from this coyote? That's a good
Yep.
thing. We want that to happen. Now, if you are just talking with me and I say the word conflict, like we did earlier, what's so amazing is that our body responds to everything that we think, that we observe, that we say as if
Yeah.
it's happening for real. So I say the word conflict, my nervous system responds, and what I think of as my survival brain says, "Ooh, there's some threat is coming.
Yeah.
So then my sympathetic nervous system engages. I might hold my breath. I might clench my jaw. My primary survival response is freeze. It doesn't last very long. It's actually a great skill. If there's a crisis, if I'm not in freeze, I am definitely the best person to manage it because I'm very calm.
Yeah.
But if it tips over into that survival response, I am like shut down for a minute. I can't process information. I forget to breathe. Once I can get my own attention to take a breath, the parasympathetic nervous system engages. So P for pause. The parasympathetic nervous system helps us to rest and digest and to pause and to enjoy. I'm looking out my window and there's a bunch of trees that finally have leaves after a very long winter.
Yeah.
My body relaxes as I notice that. So this is what's happening in our body as we're consuming social media, as we're driving and someone cuts us off in traffic, as we're hearing a coworker complain. All of that input, our survival brain, our nervous system is tracking in order to keep us safe, to recognize when do I need to get that sympathetic nervous system engaged and when can I have the parasympathetic nervous system chill me out so I can actually connect and enjoy. So what you said about it being instantaneous is so important as well. My first fundamental is get to know your survival response. Over the years, I've had so many people, once they understand this, they say, I'm just not going to react anymore. That's my goal. Oh my gosh.
Good luck with that.
I know. Oh, my heart hurts for
Yeah.
them when they say that because clearly they think that's possible and it's something they should be able to do. So I try to help them see you don't actually want to do that. It's impossible, first of all, but also it's not helpful because maybe someday you'll be on a hike and a coyote will chase you. You need to have your survival response. If we can get familiar with what's happening in our body when that survival response kicks in, like for me, holding my breath, clenching my jaw, that can become a cue that we are moving into that survival state. That is so helpful because most of us, most of the time, are in some level of survival for some reason, especially people who work in very difficult, stressful environments like healthcare or public services, or even perhaps at a grocery store, right? A lot of people vent their energy on whoever's the cashier because they happen to be convenient. That's not very nice.
Yeah.
How can we get more familiar with what's happening in our bodies? Because the easiest way to calm it down is to connect to the body. In the moment, I might try to think harder or think more clearly. But when our survival response is engaged, it short circuits our ability to think clearly. And it won't come back online until our parasympathetic nervous system is engaged.
So when you're coaching your clients, are you helping them find an anchor of some sort, that can help them ground so that you can kick in that, your high P in the moment that you need it?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So the simplest recommendation I have is to pause and connect to give your attention to any of your five senses for 10 or 15 seconds. One full breath. That is enough to trigger that survival brain to say, oh, wait, where am I? Oh, I'm in my office. I'm not actually being chased by a coyote. So I do coach my clients to see what is most appealing to them, what is easiest to them. For some people, it's feeling their feet on the floor. For others, it's having a picture perhaps on their display if they're in front of their computer a lot, or in their pocket if they are walking around, but something that they want to look at. For others, it's something tactile, whether it's a worry stone or something soft, but something that helps them connect to any of their five senses and makes it a little easier. That's very, very helpful. And I definitely do that with all of my clients.
Hey Ripplers, before we jump back in, I want to take a quick moment to share 2 ways you can go even deeper with us. First, if you're enjoying this podcast, you'll love our paid subscription offers on both Substack and Patreon. That is where you'll get exclusive content, behind the scenes insights, and extra resources about connections and relationships that you won't read anywhere else, plus a few little other ditties. It's a great way to support the show and stay connected between episodes. And let's be honest, if you're craving something even more immersive, and who isn't, check out our Connect and Grow Ripple coaching program. Man, this is a full year of coaching, content, and community designed to help you become a more engaged connector and leader in both life and business. I love this program. I think you will too. You'll join a vibrant community of like-minded Ripplers to gain access to master classes led by dynamic experts, including me, attend live workshops, group coaching sessions, and get the accountability and actionable strategies you need to build more meaningful relationships to create an even bigger ripple effect out there in the world, which who doesn't want that? You can find the links in the show notes to sign up today. Hope to see you over there. Ripple on. I remember when I first met you, and I was just starting to get out and speak, it was not something I wanted to do. It wasn't something I was very comfortable with in any capacity, mainly because I wasn't confident in what I had to say, that anybody would care what I had to say. I was confident in what I wanted to give out to the world, but I didn't think the world really cared, which created a whole lot of internal anxiety, that fear factor, right? My somatic system was in overdrive every time I was asked to speak somewhere. And I remember I got asked to speak for the ICF, which was International Coach Federation. It was a group of coaches, really tough room, like really, really tough room. And I didn't have any specific credentials around Ripple or the training. This was just a concept in a book that I was applying, and at the time felt like I was only applying it to a few small little verticals: building your network, more authentic relationships, helping your team dynamics. But from the coach's perspective, many of them were really good at what they did, but they were really bad at growing their business because they didn't know how to grow their business. And so I was asked to come in and help give that perspective. And I went in and I felt like I had just you know, did the presentation as best as I could, but I walked off feeling like I had not done, a great job. I was like beating myself up, and everybody was kind of milling about. And one lady came up to me and she said, "You did a really good job. I really enjoyed that." I'm like, I felt like I just emotionally just unloaded. I was like, I just thank you for saying that. But I mean, were you in that same room? I felt like I was speaking too fast and didn't make a lot of sense. And she said, what you did was you brought passion. She said, we get a lot of these boring ass speakers here. And she said, you really were funny. And I did not remember telling a joke. I could, to this day, could not tell you what I said that was funny. She said, you made great eye contact and you acknowledged that you were not comfortable being in the room. And she said, I thought that really helped ground you to the purpose and the presence. And I said, gosh, this is just not what not what I signed up for, not what I thought. And I just kind of actually unloaded, and it was really interesting. And she said, we all have the way that we look at ourselves through the lens of everybody else. And then we also look at ourselves through the lens of what we think we are or what we want to be, but often aren't. And she said, when you walk up to the speaker, as a speaker, what do you want to be? And I said, I just don't want to make a fool of myself. And she said, well, if you start there, you're automatically going to create conflict in yourself because your anxiety is, I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to say the wrong things. She said, what is it that prior to getting introduced, that really goes through your mind? And I said, I actually think my mind goes completely blank. I'm just I'm new to this. I don't know what to do. And she said, that's your nervous system just kicking into high gear. Like you were talking about that semantic, it's the fight or flight. And you're wanting to just bail on this opportunity. I'm like, oh, so much. Yeah, absolutely. And she
Mhm.
can I just show you a trick? She said, I have the same thing. I don't like public speaking. I never have, but I've actually done it for 40 plus years. And she said, I find that you have to find something that anchors you in the moment to remind you you're going to be okay. This is all going to be fine. And ask yourself what the purpose is for being there. And I said, and almost instantly I connected with the purpose, which was I just want to inspire one person in that audience to look at how they connect and how they engage with other people and maybe think they can do it differently or maybe do it better. She said, there's your mission right there. And she said, if you just take your two fingers and pinch in between your thumb and your index finger, she said, I anchor myself like that. So for every speaking engagement forever, before I go on stage, I actually do that. It takes me back to that moment where I felt like I was a newbie and didn't know what I was doing, all the way to present day where I do know what I'm doing and I'm feeling really good, but I'm still just as nervous. but it reminds me that I'm back to that one mission. And it is amazing how quickly that calms that down and helps the parasitic, right? Did I say
Parasympathetic. Yep.
parasympathetic system remind myself to be in the present and just
Mhm.
what's going to happen next is not going to kill me. It's not, the
Right.
coyote's not jumping out of the woods. It's not attacking me. And I'm here because there's a purpose to be here.
Mm. I love that. It's making me think about the messages of be here now and be
Yes.
present. And I think a lot of leaders want that and they feel that they're failing. This, what you just shared, this technique of pinching that soft flesh between your thumb and your finger or having some other grounding point,
Yeah.
when we can allow the nervous system to calm itself, for that parasympathetic nervous system to come back online, we naturally become present in the moment.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. It sounds like your authentic presence is what she was responding to. There was no need to critique your words because people want to connect with people's energy.
Yeah.
I share this when I talk about leadership presence or executive presence. People worry so much. Well, I have to have my hair a certain way. I have to wear certain clothes, right?
Yeah.
Okay, we can't, you know, probably can't show up as an executive in pajamas and expect people to respond the same as if you're in a suit. With that said,
Yeah.
every environment has its
There's a
own norm.
minimal acceptable.
Yeah, there's a minimum acceptable. But the tipping point is, can you accept yourself enough, not perfectly, but enough so that your nervous system is calm? Because then people are drawn to you even when you say, "Gosh, I'm really uncomfortable up here." It inspires compassion in the audience as opposed to if you hadn't calmed yourself, which you naturally did, you might have been in a bit of fight or flight. The nervous systems, all the nervous systems in the room respond to that. And then that is what feeds a resistance. When leaders introduce change and people resist, this is what it's about. And then leaders are like, you just need to get on the bus.
Yeah.
You need to adapt to the change. And then
Your
people are
way
like,
or
"Whoa."
my, yeah, it's my way or the highway, right? Yeah.
Right. It all comes down to the nervous system. And of course, yes, communication and words. But in order for us to repair relationships after we've had destructive conflict, for example, or in order for us to feel comfortable sighing like I just did, we have to first know that it's worthwhile to pause and allow ourselves to connect to our bodies. It's not all about the intellect and being quick on our feet and being quick to speak. I didn't know that I sighed so much until I think it was 1998. I was a manager in Yellowstone National Park. And I would cross over with my assistant manager. It was at the front desk of Canyon Village, Canyon Lodge. And it was so funny because I always felt so relaxed when he would come on board and I knew I'd be able to take off. He said, I love crossing over with you because you always sound like the cowardly lion from the Wizard of Oz. I was like, what? And that's when I learned I would take this huge yawn. You're like,
Yeah.
like I didn't even know I was doing that. But then in other workplaces, very often people would surprise me by asking me, "Are you okay? Are you mad? Is something bothering you?" And I kept asking, "Why?" Like, "Well, you just heaved a big sigh and I know what that means."
Yeah. But do you? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So once I figured out that pattern, in the past I would have felt nervous like, "Oh, I better stop sighing." But as I was learning about my nervous system and my freeze response and how I stop breathing, like it's really good that I actually take a deep breath. Now I have a very well cultivated habit. Even if I'm out in public and a stranger says, "Oh, don't yawn," or "Oh, what's that sigh about?" Have a big smile and I say, "Oh, I love to sigh," or "I love to yawn. It's so good for us." And then I move on. I'm not trying to change their mind, but it's a way of me giving myself more permission and also affirming what I truly believe, which it is good for us.
Yeah. I love that. I was thinking about, sort of your, what you focus on with your podcast, right? The drama free teams in that environment. One of the biggest challenges, obviously, for leaders is when they have to have those high stakes conversations. Maybe they have to tell somebody they're not doing a good job, or they need to pick it up. Their performance is not where it needs to be, or they have to reprimand them for something that needs to be a behavior that needs to be corrected, or a circumstance that needs to be addressed in a negative feedback kind of way. And the thing that I think that I really love about sort of your approach is helping people understand, even before you get into that conversation, what you are preparing your body to do, and your approach to understanding how to set that environment up for the most optimistic outcome that you can, right? And acknowledging and not fearing the fact that you are having a difficult conversation. It's not something that you want to do. It's not something that, as the person that's hearing it, wants to hear. But that said, we need to address it, because I need to show you the respect that
Mhm.
this conversation needs to happen, and it needs to take place, so that there's a firm understanding as to how we move forward. Hopefully it's not a final conversation, right? But at the end of the day, it's amazing to me still, how many leaders, once in a capacity of leadership, aren't actually trained to have those high tense, high stakes conversations. And it becomes even more difficult when it is reached a point where something has to be said and a conversation has to take place, and the leaders aren't necessarily prepared to do it. I think the fact that you're preparing them to understand, okay, what do you do when you find yourself in high tense situations, when the work coyotes come out of the woodworks? What is your response? How do you deal with it? And I think preparing and understanding sort of the challenges that you experience, because I think most of us, especially when we give negative feedback, automatically go back to a circumstance in our own lives where we may have gotten canned from a job, or we may have really gotten a talking to by a senior leader or a boss, and how horrible that felt. At least for me, whenever a circumstance like that happened, the minorest of feedback I would get that was anywhere close to being negative, I just took it like the world was falling apart. So for me, as an early day leader, I tried to avoid that at all costs, until at some point you just couldn't. And almost always it became that, adversarial kind of situation. And because the anxiety was ramped up so high before I actually went into that conversation, I didn't leave any emotional capacity to allow myself to let that P come into play.
Yeah, and I think, well, you said a lot of good stuff there. Leaders want to know how. There are so many very popular books talking about why it's important to have difficult conversations. All of the theory and the how might be in there, but it is not specific enough for the person to be able to say, okay, now I know what to do. Or some models are so complicated, even if I'm certified to facilitate the training, I cannot remember it
Yeah.
without the book. So I really
So you're
like
kind of
to
like
go.
underneath the desk. Hang on a sec. We got to get to part two.
I know. Oh my gosh, it's true. Over the years, when I worked for different health systems, every system might have its go-to communication model. And often people would really enjoy the training, but then they would leave and forget completely about it because their worlds are busy and chaotic and it's too much to remember. Or there's like a pithy statement of stay above the line, don't go below the line. Okay, good. I like that concept. But how? What do I do if I'm below the line besides berate myself and say, I'm a loser. I went below the line. Okay. So this is why my Drama Free Teams podcast includes every single episode, includes some simple 90-second activity
Yeah,
you can do.
it's very good.
Thank you. Because leaders who need to have those difficult conversations can do some very small things to help themselves feel more grounded, which then creates more safety for the other person and even manipulate the meeting room. Let's say they're meeting in person. Seat the other person, the employee, close to the door so they have access. Make sure there's
Mhm.
nothing between them and the door. Their survival brain takes that information in. That helps to calm the survival response, as opposed to putting them opposite you on a desk and the doors behind you. Simple things. It's amazing. I don't know, 2007, I coached a leader in the insurance industry, and her top salesperson was a very much a fight, very reactive person. And she was like, I don't want to lose him, but I can't keep him the way he is. So I gave her this tip when the three of us met, and I did a little bit of coaching with him. It did not take very much. Once people understand their survival response and that they actually can manage it, if they want to keep their job and they want to have happy relationships, they've got the motivation to practice it. And he did great. She did not have that issue come up again.
That's great.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be so hard. It doesn't have to be so complicated, you know?
What do you think about? I'm a big believer when I've actually had to have difficult conversations, and thankfully I don't have a ton of them anymore. But when I've had it, I don't actually do it in an office or behind a desk. I like to, hey, let's go for a walk. There's
Mm,
something about movement that relaxes the nervous system, at least for me and the other person. And I always say that, hey, look, for whatever the conflict is, you're going to have your perspective. I'm going to have my perspective, and we're going to try and meet somewhere in the middle. Because at the end of the day, the only good outcome here is one that's going to be mutually beneficial. And I often find that people are far more receptive when you have to have those high stake conversations when you take them out of their immediate bubble, not at their cubicle, not in your office, not in the conference room with HR, you know, being in a situation that gives you the ability to allow yourself to let your hair down a little bit and allow your nervous energy to sort of move through your body as you're having the conversations. And are you a believer in that? And is it doing what I think it's doing in terms of, your body and sort of the natural reset to help you deal with whatever the stressful situation might be?
I think each person will have the setup that will feel good to them. And I think it's fantastic that you realize the walking is helpful. It absolutely discharges energy when we move our body in a way that it wants to move.
Yeah.
And walk is very helpful. Some other people might find being very still and not having a lot of distraction that soothes their nervous system. So I think the takeaway here is for leaders to get curious about, if you want to meet in your office, why? Is it because you feel more powerful? Is it because it's super comfortable? I had an amazing opportunity during my business program, my MBA, to have a mentorship with Ken Blanchard.
Oh,
So it was amazing. I was able to
yeah.
go spend a week with him. And in his office, he had a big sofa. It was not a huge office, but it was a, good size office with a sofa, comfortable sofa. He had stuffed animals, and he encouraged people to hold the stuffed animal. He really created, I honestly, the reason I wanted to do this mentorship with him was to see, does this person who I find so inspiring live what he's saying? And
Oh,
I can
yeah.
tell you it was 100% yes, which
That,
was so delightful. But I remembered the stuffed animals from then on. He made it okay to be playful, and also, if you need comfort, grab the stuffed eagle or whatever. So I think, again, if a leader has to have a difficult conversation, sometimes they don't have the luxury of choosing multiple locations. But if they do, they can get curious about, how do I feel if I go into this conference room where it's a small room with a huge table and there's no room to move?
yeah.
The other person is probably going to feel similar.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
maybe let's meet there.
Uh, I could talk to you about this stuff all day long. I mean, I love this conversation so much because there's so many things that I think we could take this, so many different directions we could take this. But I want to be respectful of your time. I'd love to invite you back to be on
Great.
the show because I think that that, and forget the show. Let's just like start having a regular Zoom because I could learn
Right.
so much from you, and I love the work that you're doing, and I love your approach to it. Your podcast is excellent. One of the things we do on this show before we end is we always go through these. You remember the 8 minute ripple that we did, right? So we do
Yeah.
these ripple connection questions. They're just fun questions to ask. There's no gotchas, but they give our audience just a little bit more insight as to who you are as a person. Are you okay with that?
Absolutely. That sounds fun.
Fantastic. What will be the title of the book that is written about your life?
Wowie. That's a good question. She survived.
That's a good one. I like that. That's a good.
I,
Well,
I, I don't want that to imply I'm setting the bar at survival.
right.
However, I've had a lot of trauma,
Yeah.
even as an adult, there were times when I wasn't sure I would survive, and
Really.
yet I have. This is what, of course, right? As we heal, we then want to help others in a similar fashion or have that freedom. That's why I do the work that I do. That's why
Yeah.
hope is so important to me.
Well, I'll just say one thing and then we'll go back to the questions. The one thing I can tell you that I've always respected and admired about you is that you really, really have a big heart and you're very committed to making a positive difference, not only for the work that you do, but anybody that you come in contact with. And you made an indelible mark on me. And I've followed your work from afar and what you're doing and what all the things that you've put out into the world. And it doesn't shock me, but it also doesn't shock me that you've had these things and you've come out on the other side because you are that strong and you are that good. So I'm
Thank you,
proud of
Steve.
you and I'm proud to call you a friend. So just a little
I
side note there.
thank you. And I'm also a person who reaches out for help a
Yeah,
lot to
that's
get,
good.
I certainly am strong, and also I will say, "Hey, I need help," and I can't do it by myself.
That's good. Ripplers, hopefully you took note of that. That's an important thing we talk a lot about, that you have to have those people that you can reach out to when you need it and that will be there for you. So I think that's great. That's a great reminder. What did the 7 year old version of Annie want to be when she grew up?
A nurse. Isn't that
Yeah,
interesting?
pretty darn close, right?
Right. But what's funny is I would never want to have responsibility for another person's body, even if it's to draw blood.
Yeah,
No. But I played a lot as a 7-year-old. I like to have my little pretend stethoscope and all the things.
that's
So
awesome.
yeah, I thought it was pretty fun that I ended up in healthcare.
Yeah, no kidding. What's the current version of Annie you want to be when she grows up?
To be honest, my entire life, all I've actually wanted to be, except for 7-year-old wanting to be a nurse, is a mom.
Yeah,
I'm 55. So who knows? Maybe a child will come into our lives and need a home or want a home. But um, that was that was something I've grieved deeply.
yeah,
And and yet, of course, there are people who say, "Oh, you've mothered me," and all that. That's lovely. And
yeah,
the experience of being a parent is so unique and so profound. And I have so much respect for anyone who parents a child, whether through adoption or whatever means.
yep,
So it's interesting. The reason I got a master's degree was I thought, well, if I'm not going to have a child yet, I guess I'll continue my education.
sure,
And
sure.
yes, I love to learn, right? And
Yeah,
PhD, same thing. Well, okay, I guess I'm not going to have a child now. So, okay, let's keep going. Let me prepare myself to be able to give as profoundly as possible to the world. So now I'm just having so much fun. I'm really, really having fun with building the Drama Free Teams podcast and helping leaders cultivate drama free communication moment by moment. Drama
yeah,
shows up all day, every day, even in my life, it's normal. But that's really what I want to keep doing.
yeah. That's awesome. What would you be doing if you weren't doing what you're doing now? And that could mean professionally, it could be talking to Steve, it could be anything. So,
Yeah. What would I be doing? Well, I would be probably hanging out with my husband in our new recliners that were delivered today, which
all
I'm so
right.
excited about because I've had a backache for years
Yep.
from the old ones, and just connecting. So my husband and I met after we both had lost our spouses, and we have such profound conversations, and I just love him so much, and I love time with him. So that's what I'd be doing.
That's awesome. You do very high pressured work, right? And I've got to imagine that despite, all the best training, some of that rubs off. And so the stress, inevitably has to be dealt with. So what do you do to de-stress and find peace and recenter for yourself?
I practice the activities that I share in my podcast. One that I've heard a lot from listeners or from leaders I coach, one that they go to is called the sunshine exercise. I
Okay.
do that all the time.
Yeah.
It's very simple. It's just imagine you're being bathed in really beautiful, perfect temperature for you sunlight. It'll never burn you because I burn very easily. I have to manage my mind and say, okay,
Yeah.
this is safe,
Yeah.
and just breathe. And I imagine feeling the warmth of that sunshine. I imagine my breath flowing through my body, down through the soles of my feet into the earth.
Oh, I love
It
that.
is so powerful, and it doesn't
Yeah.
have to take very long. I do that I did that today in my office. I'll do that if I can't sleep at night and I'm lying in bed. So I have simple practices like that that help me discharge energy, but it doesn't require me to tell the whole story of, oh, this day was so hard because of this or
Yeah.
that. That prolongs it sometimes. Instead, I try to connect to how I'm feeling internally. I might cry.
Yeah.
Tears are helpful. It helps the
Sure.
energy get out,
Yeah.
right? Or I might, I don't know, I don't really punch the air, but very rarely, if I really feel feisty, I'll do that. Can you
No,
imagine? I'm sure you're like, Annie, I can't flee. That's not flying.
I don't know. I need to get a video of that next time you do it. That'd be great.
Okay. And I'm thinking of the fitness routine my husband and I do, and I like that motion, but
Yeah.
yeah, pretty much it's what I already shared.
That's awesome. What is your superpower?
My superpower is observing chaos and complexity and figuring out pretty quickly how it fits together and what is the root.
That's good. I love that, especially for
Mhm.
your work. That's got to be an important
Exactly.
superpower to have. That's
It
fantastic.
is. It is. And that allows me then in coaching sessions, it allows me to ask questions that help the client think differently or reflect on that similar pattern without saying, like you said, as coaches, we don't tell people this is what you should do or this is what I think is going on.
Yep.
Sometimes they'll ask, well, Annie, I'm completely stumped. What do you think? And I'll share a thought. But
Sure.
usually I rely on those questions. But those two things, actually, the pattern, the figuring out the complexity, where are the connection points? What's the root? But then also, I trust myself. I trust the wacky metaphors that come to my mind enough to where I'll say, I don't know why this came into my mind, but I was just seeing, I don't know, a purple polar bear rolling down a hill. And the client will say, oh my gosh, I was just talking about a purple polar bear. So that's fun. And I love that I have cultivated self trust. I definitely cultivated it. It was not immediate.
I love that. In the finish this sentence. In the next 5 years, I will.
In the next 5 years, I will pay off my student loans.
All right.
That is a given. Finally, after 30 years, they will be done.
All right. Well, hey,
Oh,
good.
throw a party.
That's great. Well, last couple of questions. When you hear the term the ripple effect, what does that bring to into your mind, or what does that conjure up for you?
I love this term because I absolutely associate it with you, even though I've heard it before. But like when we first met, I think we both felt that kinship,
Yeah.
the kindred spirit. I loved your openness. I loved what you stood for. And I think about generosity. I think about authenticity. And I think about helping other people cultivate that with one another.
Ah,
Thanks to
love
you.
that answer, and thank you for the compliment. I appreciate that very much. I feel the exact same for you. What positive ripple can I be looking to create for you?
Well, I suppose if you find yourself in conversations with people, particularly in healthcare, who
Yeah.
are struggling with difficult conversations or struggling with self-confidence as leaders or building executive presence, all those challenges that leaders face, help them find my website.
All
I
right.
have a new starter kit, the Drama-Free Leadership Starter
Yes.
Kit.
Thank you. Yep.
Yeah, I'm so proud of this. I've been working for months. It's my full signature workshop. It's a 32-page workbook. It's a complete resource with no hidden sales attempts. It's actually, I just want to give people a complete
That,
resource.
that's
And then, of
great.
course, they'll get to know my style and maybe they'll say, oh, I want to work with Annie. But if they don't, fine. If it helps them, I'm super happy. So if they go to anniecampanile.com, there's a resources page. It's actually on the homepage as well. The Drama Free Leadership Starter Kit is available. And you might have to put a link to spell Campanile, Campanile. But yeah.
Yeah, we will
There.
definitely we'll put a link so everybody can find that in the show notes. And are there any other links aside from your website that you'd want people to follow your work?
So I do post on LinkedIn. I will say I'm not super active. I'm choosing not to handcuff myself to posting on social media and
No.
trying to get followings. That doesn't resonate with me.
Yeah.
However, I do think LinkedIn can be a very useful site, and I absolutely welcome people finding me there, connecting. The podcast, Drama Free Teams, is probably the best resource where I share 15 to 18-minute episodes, and really, and I guess capture my thinking with a story and an activity. So
Yeah.
that's another good resource for folks.
It's excellent. I highly, highly recommend it. Make sure all of our audience goes and checks that out. It's available on Spotify and Apple Podcast and probably other platforms too, right?
All the platforms,
All
yes.
the platforms. Fantastic. Well, Annie, I am so grateful that you agreed to do this. It has been an absolute delight to catch up, and I'm honest. We definitely need to like maybe make this more of a regular thing, and then have you back for another episode because there are things I wanted to go to that we just didn't get to, but I just so love this conversation every second of it. So thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I feel the same. I would love to come back, and it's always such a gift to talk with you. So thank you.
Oh, I appreciate that. Well, guys, we'll be back with another episode of the Ripple Effect podcast. But until then, Annie, ripple on. Hey, we've reached the end of another Ripple Effect podcast, and I want to personally thank you for joining us today. It's because of you that we do this work, and I want to encourage you to be sure to follow our guest, show them some love and support any way that you can. If you like this episode, share it with a friend, a colleague, or heck, just put it out to your entire network. It's through these efforts that you actually create a ripple for this show. It helps us grow and expand. And if you'd be so kind, find us on Spotify and Apple Podcast and leave us a review. That helps bring the show into the view of more audience. So we greatly, greatly appreciate that. And finally, just a quick shout out to those of you that have signed up for our Patreon and Substack. As a paid subscriber, we can't begin to thank you enough for your support. It's through this investment that you show that the work that we do matters, and it allows us to continue to do it and support it. So thank you so much. We greatly appreciate it. If you haven't signed up at Patreon or Substack, what the heck, man? What's going on? Throw your boy a ripple, would you? And come on over. That's where you'll find exclusive content, some behind the scenes special stuff, and you'll also get an opportunity to reach out to our guests on the podcast. I will take your questions personally and take them to them and get you answers. How about that? That alone, that exclusive behind the scenes thing, that is worth every penny, maybe more than a couple pennies. How about that? So anyway, thanks for joining us. Thanks for supporting us. As always, ripple on.